Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you to the NewEarth Haven and Akasha. We have an extraordinary person. It's several people today, but the first person I'm going to introduce is Tom Brown. And I met Tom about, I don't even want to tell you how long it was because then it ages us, but we'll call it 30 years ago. Tom and I used to hang out at places like the United States Psychotronics Association. That's a mouthful, isn't it? And what that was about was learning about technologies that were way outside of the box. And Tom's going to show you some of that tonight. Amazing stuff. And the believability comes from doing this stuff. It's one thing to see it, but it's another thing to experiment and try some of these things yourself. Because once you've actually seen sacred geometrics or combinations of different metals or frequency generators, and you see the effects that they actually have, for example, on weather or people or environments, then it makes it believable. Until then, it's a little bit difficult to grasp this kind of technology has been around and people have been experimenting in this realm for over 100 years. But that's what psychotronics and some of these really outlandish technologies are all about. They've been around for a very, very long time. People have been experimenting for actually more than 100 years, getting results in really far out stuff. And so that's some of the stuff that Tom's going to bring to us this evening. So let's have a warm welcome for Tom Brown.
Well, thank you, Don. Much appreciated. Don's an amazing researcher himself. Well, welcome to Voices of the NewEarth. This is something we're planning on doing regularly here. My name's Tom Brown, as Don said, and I'm on the faculty of the NewEarth University Science and Innovative Design faculty. And tonight we're going to talk about living natural energies. I like natural living energies, but look better when I put the words in that order. Now, modern science, everybody's like, people believe modern science, they like spout it as though it's gospel, right? Because scientists figured it out. But according to science, everything's on the electromagnetic spectrum. It's just lines of, everything's just vibrations all lined up, from 0 to infinity. And everything's on that except life and consciousness, the two most important things in our lives. So there's obviously a vast range outside of modern science, and we'll have a look, although we're going to rely on university research and things in our talk today. So first of all, I always like to think orientation of consciousness. Well, first of all, it's not just what are we going to think about, it's how do we think. So I like to go back to the ancient mystery schools and the liberal arts. Getting a little feedback there. I don't know if people are familiar with the trivium and quadrivium. The trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric. In simple terms, grammar is your ability to define things in objective reality. Logic is your ability to process it, get rid of false data, find out what is true. And rhetoric, the ability to express it. So basically it's input, processing, output. It's real simple, but you have to follow them in that order and under precise rules. But what are you processing? The quadrivium, the objective reality. Mathematics, abstract numbers. Well, what are numbers? We think, well, you can count 1, 2, I got 5 of these things. I got 5 apples and 3 pears and 2 rocks, right? Well, we just got a bunch of things. But the number 5, if you cut an apple lengthwise through, sideways through, you see the number 5 inside of it. That apple is 5 just as much as it's red, and it has flavor. 5 is a quality. 1 is a quality. It's not just you have 1 of something, everything is 1, because if you multiply 1 by any number, it's still the same number because it is 1. So mathematics is more than just the simple discursive mathematics of the modern lines of thought, but it's actually the qualitative nature of numbers in themselves. Geometry, numbers in space, which we're going to look at tonight, which is basically the Platonic solids. It's only 5 regular polyhedra which come out of space, and we'll have a look at those in a second. Music, numbers in time, and cosmologies, numbers in space and time. The 5 senses. So here we have the 3, 4, 5 triangle of Pythagoras. And of course, it was the solution. They used to say, well, it was like a death penalty because it's not a strict linear equation. You have to know the roots, and it gives you an idea of the roots into the higher dimensions. So the 3 is the trivium, the 4 is the quadrivium, and the 5 is the 5 senses. And out of these is everything you know to derive higher knowledge and the path of the mystery schools. So when you think of it in that sense, things like the modern science of particle physics and stuff is actually an offense against this process. Not that people would think that, because everybody thinks that's how the world goes. So we'll look at Platonic solids. They say these are the 5 regular polyhedra that come out of space. It's hard to say it, ringing in my ear to speak. But anyway, tetrahedron, fire, and these were attributes given by Plato, although they were probably far older. Octahedron, air, hexahedron, earth, icosahedron, water, and dodecahedron, or ether, the quintessence of the others. So what we're going to look at tonight is the icosahedron, water. Plato attributed that to water, and there's obviously more to it, as we'll find out. Now, Kepler, who was basically one of the people that brought forth the concept of heliocentrism, by using the Platonic solids and showing the orbits of the planets, he says, we may ask why all trees and bushes, or at least most of them, unfold a flower in a 5-sided pattern with 5 petals. Some botanist might well examine the sap of plants to see if any difference there corresponds to the shapes of their flowers. We'll see that there may actually be something to this. So here's water molecule. Water molecules are tetrahedrons, basically H2O. And like Rudolf Steiner said, the elements of the chemist are the corpses of cosmic processes. So what sort of cosmic processes would these be? Well, oxygen's a reducing agent, right? It rusts, it needs on fire. There's a fire going. It's basically oxygen reducing the carbon structures in the wood. And hydrogen is basically levity. So that brings things up, aromatics. So basically, they're a combination of levity and gravity. In modern physics, everything's just gravity. And that's the problem with it, because it's actually polarized. There's a levity force as well, and you can see it operating. Look at that fire there. Some of it's going up, the most powerful stuff. So, but there was in the 1500s, in the Accademia del Cimento, they issued the Contra Levitatum maxim. You weren't allowed to speak about it anymore by official edict. Only that which could be weighed and measured was allowed into sciences. So these things were banished. But what you find out is what is molecular geometry begins as interlocking tetrahedrons of water molecules that join into icosahedral structures. Here's icosahedral structure. They join into pentagonal superclusters. So we're seeing that water is actually, in a structured form, is actually following the sacred geometry, as Plato said. And what we have over here is a little illustration which Juan has put together showing the relationship of the tetrahedron to the higher forms. Basically, all the Platonic solids interlock with each other. And this is what's happening at the atomic level in water. So this is from Professor Martin Chaplin, South Bank University in London. Growing support for liquid water containing hydrogen-bonded clusters related to icosahedral clustering. Reasonable that the structure of liquid water should be related to the structures of ice existing at atmospheric pressure. The tetrahedral water cluster consisting of 14 water molecules is shown at left. That's this one here. This cluster occurs in cubic ice and is topologically identical to clusters in diamond. Regular arrangements of 20 of these 14 molecule structures form an icosahedral network. Such clusters appear to be relatively stable in liquid water. So basically, this is what we're looking at in water, in structured water. So it's amazing when you really start looking at water, a truly abnormal liquid. The water displays properties differing greatly from those of other liquids that chemically should resemble it. Main absorber of sunlight in the atmosphere. So at 4 degrees centigrade, water expands on heating or cooling. So if we look at this little diagram here, we can see that basically, here's 8 degrees centigrade, so during the sunshine, summer, the densest water is at the bottom, and same in winter. So no other substance acts like this. Water is the only one. Water shrinks on melting, which is opposite of other chemicals. Hot water freezes faster than cold water, which is interesting. And water has unusually high surface tension, viscosity, melting point, boiling point, heat of vaporization, specific heat, dielectric constant. Well, what does that mean? Well, specific heat, that's how much heat you can put in before the heat rises up, which means you have to put a lot of heat in. That's why it takes a lot to boil water. And the importance of that is we're basically made out of water. Say, average person's 2/3 water, but by molecular count, we're 99%, probably greater than 99% water when you count the molecules. So we are basically water beings. So this is essential. So life couldn't exist on Earth if it wasn't for these special properties. Same with low compressibility. Oddities between 30 and 40 degrees centigrade shows something very important occurs in respect of structure. That was from Giorgio Picardi's work, the chair at the chemistry department at University of Florence a few decades back. These properties are great importance for biological processes as well as ocean temperature and climate stability. X-ray diffraction shows unusually detailed structure due to complex structuring of molecular clustering. They can't really tell. It almost seems like there's different types of molecules in. So Albert St. Georgi, he was the father of modern biochemistry. He said, water is life's matter and matrix, mother and medium. There is no life without water. Water is a living organism. This is more of Picardi's work here. Natural spring water, more biologically effective when fresh compared to bottled and aged. Changes in effects on biological processes when heated or cooled, even though it's chemically identical. By means of water in the aqueous structure, that external forces are able to react on living organisms. Understanding the structure of water is indispensable in order to demonstrate how the most common of liquids, the giver of life, is the most complex and has the richest properties of all liquids known. Water is an exceptional substance. And to quote Picardi, the existence of a structure so delicate and sensitive permits the assumption that appropriate actions are capable of modifying the structure itself in an infinite number of ways. And thus, we may assume that water is sensitive to extremely delicate influences and is capable of adapting itself to the most varying circumstances to a great degree attained by no other liquid. It may be that it is this infinity of possibilities that makes the existence of life possible. And again, St. Georgi, since the molecular structure of water is the essence of life, the man who can control that structure in cellular systems will change the world. Now, this is the work of Gerald Pollack. He's a professor up at the water lab up at University of Washington. And he's come up with what they call the fourth phase of water. Right? Well, it's 3 phases. We've got ice, water, vapor. And it's interesting. I was talking about the X-ray reading. So ice, you get one. Vapor, you get another. But when you do water, you get combinations of them. But then they found there's actually a 4th phase, which has been proposed. But Dr. Pollack has pretty much shown how it operates. And we can see here, this is a hydrophilic gel here. And this little bit here, they'll put particles in here. This expels them. So this is negatively charged. And they find out it's actually these hexagonal structures. So it's a liquid crystal forms. And this is what our cells are made of. And it's charged by sunlight. So you can put sunlight in to get the effect, or when you have the effect, you can pull energy out. And they're actually patenting batteries and generators based on this technology. They're sort of at the cutting edge of this research here. And also, too, they've shown that if they have like tubes made out of these hydrophilic substances, you shine light on them, and everything starts flowing through, which is exactly what happens in plants, because plants are this 4th phase of water. EZ water stands for exclusion zone. And this is just because we're talking about the sun effect on the atmosphere. what we see is the, and of course, I got to say, all these things are contentious. You know, you read this university guys and scientific papers, but then other guys are going, no, that one's wrong. So confirmation bias. I just picked the stuff that followed my narrative, but I believe that there's something to it. So here, this is Mississippi River flows and solar cycles, but what they found is there was a time lag of about 33 years, which is 3 solar cycles. And also the Lake Victoria experiments, which have been analyzed. So you have solar cycles and lake levels. And also because of that, what you find here, this is from old Russian research, effects of solar activity on Earth's atmosphere and biosphere, is the water vol. So what you find is when at certain conditions, because of the rise and fall of the solar activity, you get infestations, which of course then affects crops. So the whole function of life is based on the interaction of the sun and the water on Earth. But there's more to it even than that. Giorgio Picardi, I've mentioned him a couple times, Chemical Basis of Medical Climatology, a fantastic book. What he did, they did like over 10 years of experiments, basically mixing bismuth chloride with water and to make oxybismuth chloride colloidal solution. And they would time it because in industrial and pharmaceutical chemistry, sometimes you have like expensive ingredients and you put them all together, you follow the process, but the thing doesn't work. So they set out to see if there was any sort of external factors such as solar or geomagnetic activity which would affect that. And that's what so they were doing this all over. They were doing it in Italy and Russia, down on Kerguelen Island, which is down off of Antarctica, for years, doing the experiments against solar cycles. Wolf numbers. So a wolf number is basically sunspot number. That was just one of the counts they used on these old things. But what they found is these are blood coagulation tests. They were also testing chicken blood, coagulating according to this, and what they found out is that it reacts perfectly, which means that everything inside your body is being affected constantly by solar and geomagnetic activity, directly affected. But what was interesting, when they put data analysis, they put the 9 years of data together and they got this big drop in the data here, and they were trying to figure out what it was. And what Picardi found out, and that's why he built this device up here, trying to figure it out, it says the sun, if we're looking at the solar system from the galactic center, it's at a 60-degree angle. The sun goes around like this, and it's in an ellipse, and it goes faster and slower. So during March, it's going the fastest during the ellipse. It's coming up around, starting to point towards the galactic center, and that's when they were getting this other drop, which only showed up in the data analysis of almost a decade of work. So even our relationship to the center of the galaxy is actually affecting our biological processes. This is the drop picture method developed by Theodore Schwenk. Basically what this is, you have a petri dish and you fill it with glycerin, and then you put purified water on top. And this is photographed from straight down. You drop the water down on it, they take a picture right when it hits. And good drinking water, so this is basically good water. You can see the patterns in there, very lively. And the amount of drops you can put in and still get the effect, you get up to about 30-something drops if it's really good water. If it's polluted water, you might run out of pictures in about 10 to 12. So this is polluted water. You can see where there's the rings around there. It's not as perfectly formed. It's not that polluted. I had a lot of other pictures, but these were the best resolution, so I put those up because I thought at least you can see what's happening with it. Give an idea of the qualitative nature, just not the, it's not just molecules. There's more to this whole picture. There's Dr. Bern Kroplin researching. He was researching on space medicine, working on ways of helping astronauts self-treat themselves. And what he found is weak magnetic field alterations not detectable by conventional measuring devices reflected in the water structure. So this is using dark field microscopy. And basically what we're looking at here, drops of their saliva before and after like a 2-minute cell phone call, looking at the changes in them. There's a lot of other research on this, but I think people are pretty much aware of that. This was Juan and I, we were looking at this, we were trying to figure this one out. water charged in a golden section pyramid at minus 38 degrees. And man takes it out, hits it, and it turns to ice, but it's not ice. So trying to figure out what it was, so I was doing a little research on it, and I found this in a paper on strange properties of water. Scientists had known before that water can remain liquid at extremely cold temperatures, but it has not yet been possible to obtain reliable structural information for liquid water below minus 38 degrees Celsius. The rapid onset of crystallization below minus 38 degrees Celsius renders this region an exceptionally nearly inaccessible no man's land until at about minus 115 degrees, water assumes a glassy, non-crystalline form. And I read in another paper, it's actually because when you get water down below here and you heat it freezes when you heat it up rather than cooling it down, so it's quite interesting. And where's water come from? Space. It's all over the place. Star found shooting water bullets. I love these. I always collect these little bits. Solar wind creates water and stardust. Implications for life. Scientists discover the oldest, largest body of water in existence in space. Astronomers discover snow surrounding new star for the first time. They've actually called it the snow line because they can tell the way the energy of the stars pushed it back, so there's like a ring of snow. And of course, they're saying this around a black hole, which we know pretty much doesn't exist, although we're having some good arguments with some of our good friends in the audience here tonight. 13 billion years away. So they're saying it's gigantic. It's actually not that far away, so the quantities aren't as big as they say. But the fact is that water occurs in space around stars because you just need oxygen and hydrogen. So, and even like the great floods of the past could have been solar flares hitting Earth during large, when we had heavy oxygen atmosphere. And this is the general water cycle. It's quite, I think we all have a general idea of this. Water evaporates, goes up, comes back down. But how come there's not clouds all the time when there's water evaporating? There's obviously more to it. And when I lived in Northern California, I lived on a little coastal stream called the Mattole River. And beautiful, I did a documentary on Victor Schauberger's work in 1991. We filmed a lot of it on there. There was beautiful natural water flows. And remember, first year we were there in the autumn, the water came in, the leaves start filling in, the water flows, so went down there. I thought, let's clean it out. We went down and just cleaned out all the little rivulets and stuff, so the water was flowing. And pretty much about 2 hours into it, you start feeling the breeze, this cool breeze coming up from the ocean. We were 25 miles upstream, but you could feel this cool breeze coming up, and it rained within about 24 hours. So I go, well, because we had already been doing this. We've been doing experiments with some equipment we'll see in a little while. So I already pretty much had an idea what was going on. So what we did is we would do it every year. We'd actually have like a little work party. We'd wait until like a day in late September, and we'd go in and we'd clean the river out. And sure enough, for about the 9 years I lived there, we had rain within 48 hours of getting this going. So there's a electroenergetic process to this. It's not just merely heat and molecules moving. And to show this is Kelvin's thunderstorm, or also known as the water thread or Wasserfaden experiment. I've done this experiment. This one didn't have time to get it together for here, but I think we'll get it operating here in the future because it's fascinating to see. So basically, you just have water coming down in two streams. And you have basically copper here, copper there. So this is dropping into there, this is dropping into there. Those are connected across, and you get electricity out of it, sparks. And say, well, yeah, it's like lightning, it sparks, it's interesting. In fact, they have to actually engineer against this in oil refineries. The oil refineries will blow up. It's called the Kelvin effect. But the interesting thing is, you touch the copper, you get a shock off it, not a very big one, a little mild one, like touching a doorknob on a staticky day, or you touch a fluorescent to it, it'll flash. So it's not a large amount, but the interesting thing is they say, well, lightning, that's just like electricity, that's just electrons going from Earth to the sky or sky to the Earth. There's some arguments on that. We looked at it as a collapse of dielectric lines of force in space, which we were able to demonstrate around high capacitive fields. But what's interesting, if you're in a physics class, like in high school, and you want to do like some experiments in with like a Wimshurst machine, electrostatics, and go, well, sorry, we can't really do those experiments today. It's raining. It's too damp. I go, well, what about lightning, right? That's in the rain. So electrostatics and lightning can't be the same. They're related, but there's more to it. So this is more akin to Orgone energy of Wilhelm Reich. We can think of it in that sense. And this is Victor Schauberger's work. Could do a whole lecture on him, but I just wanted to mention him. Here's one of his quotes. Nature is not served by rigid laws, but by rhythmical reciprocal processes. Nature uses none of the preconditions of the chemist or the physicist for the purposes of evolution. Nature excludes all fire on principle for purposes of growth. Therefore, all contemporary machines are unnatural and constructed according to false premises. Nature avails herself of the biodynamic form of motion through which the biological prerequisite for the emergence of life is provided. Its purpose is to procreate higher conditions of matter out of the originally inferior raw materials, which afford the evolutionarily older or the numerically greater rising generation the possibility of a constant capacity to evolve. For without any growing and increasing reserves of energy, there would be no evolution or development. The results first and foremost in the collapse of the so-called law of conservation of energy, and in further consequences, the law of gravity and all other dogma lose any rational or practical basis. Now, Schauberger is here with his energy generator. He was a Forstmeister, and he figured out that there's a levity process in water when you were dealing with it. So using egg shapes, he was working with water generators. It's a fantastic story of suppressed technology. This is actually his repulsor. He was actually working on flying discs. They had some working, apparently. That's supposedly some of the stories behind Nazi flying saucers. It's hard to know whether that's true or not. But even when you see the egg, this egg's actually flowing contrary to the flow. It pulls up into the stream. There's a lot of work on Schauberger out there. Just search for his name in it. But it's important to show that there were people that understood this and tried to bring the proper technology out. He said that the types of engines we're using these days, the internal combustion engines, we're actually putting a bad energy into the air, which, of course, science doesn't see. And here we have Robert in our audience today. This is some of his work. He's allowed me to use water structures. There's a lot of different ways that people are structuring water and doing research. I like this because it's practical experiments. So basically, this is a filter. It has some tubes in it. Some balls, which have specific sort of rare earths and different, obviously proprietary things because it's a business. But what I like about it is these are basically fields next to each other that these are done out of. So there's controls and structured water, and you can actually see it. And this is gas discharge visualization technology, Professor Korotkov's work. You see well water, it's sort of an advanced sort of Curlian photography, a way of seeing energy around things. So you see water after structuring, before structuring, after structuring. So clearly, by putting vertical energy into water and structuring it, you can see the direct effects on life. So you see the importance of what this is. And this is our wonderful fountain up front here that Juan has designed. And Schauberger says, we need no science of formulas, but a science of forms. And then there was the British philosopher Ruskin that said, always stand by form against force. Because nature works in forms, not forces, really. So this is Rudolf Steiner's work, the four ethers. And these are basically, you can say there's one ether with four sort of activity spheres within it. Warmth, light, tone or chemical, and life. So without getting too deeply into them, we'll say warmth. Warmth ether keeps us together, right? That's our biological function. If our warmth goes too high or too low, we lose our ego because we're dead. So we're gone. So that's impulse creating binding biological force. Light makes things visible, upright force in plants and humans. Tone or chemical ether, which is where the Orgone ranges it, harmonizes structure development. It's called the tone ether or chemical ether because of, if we know about cymatics, you can put certain vibrations in, you get different structures. And of course also that water sort of facilitates chemical to liquid phase. And life unifies an object in its environment. That's a little hard to think of, but we'll take a look at them in relationship to elements. And these forms have been derived out of sort of observable processes in nature on the left. On the right, they're just the ancient Vedic tattvas. I thought, well, they must have known something, so I use them as a symbolic language because we're looking at a science of forms. And they're relational. So we see here ether, warmth ether, and fire element. Warmth ether is birth, fire element's dying away. They're actually binding us together. So if you look at like wood that's burning, the warmth ether holds it together. The fire allows it to come apart. The fire allows the ether to go back to its reserve at the periphery of space. So it's really one thing, the Janus head thing that holds biological forms together. So really there's 7 levels, go think of them like that. So fire and warmth would be the same level. Light and air obviously go together. Light's on things, air is in between things. So we see the opposite separates, connects. Tone and water. We're getting these ideas because we're going to get into these shortly. I just wanted to lay down the groundwork here. Tone's discrete, water's continuous. Tone's like a tree, water's like a river. Right? Same patterns, but different sort of functions in 3D reality. Tone, cellular division, water fertilization, intervals, dense. And then life, that's inner mobility and posture, earth rigid position, right? So life ether is in the densest of matter, which is, Wilhelm Reich showed that with his Bion experiments, where he would get sand red hot, put it in sterilized water, and was able to get pulsing energy vesicles coming out of them. And a good way to think of this is a tree. People think of a tree, what's a tree? The top, the bottom. Think of it this way. The roots are what we call the roots. They're rooted in the elements. They're firm in the ground. The top of the tree is rooted in the ethers. But the ethers are mobile and subject to cosmological conditions. The simplest, of course, being day and night. And of course the moon, those planted by the moon. But there's also much deeper rhythms through all the planets and the different structures of the planets. So that there's actually... It's a reciprocal process. So think of it that when you look at the tops of trees, think they're rooted in the ethers. How does that work? They're not in this space. They're in a different sort of space. They just become active when there's a proper receiver, and that's why all the plants look like antennas and receiving the different cosmological processes as they occur, which brings the energy into the earth, which is part of our life process. And for collecting the life energy, Wilhelm Reich, the discoverer of Orgone energy, atmospheric life energy. We have over on the right here is an Orgone accumulator, which is basically a box made out of wood and metal, which accumulates. I've had one like this that you could sit inside, and it's amazing. You can feel the warmth streaming off the walls. A lot of good medical benefits of them, which unfortunately brought down the wrath of the FDA on poor Wilhelm. So they're very simple, just insulating layers, dielectric and metal. So they're capacitors. They're simple capacitors, metal, dielectric. But they're directional with metal on the inside. And what it does, you can even show where they raise the temperature. So if you make 2 identical boxes, only one is lined with metal, just to make sure that you have the functional, that raises the temperature. And you can also get, if you put like an evacuated vacuum tube in there and look at it after a while, you can actually see light appearing in it too. So it's got both thermal and optical, which is warmth ether, light ether, and that's why the tone ether is up, because the other ones are in there, and then it affects light because it's coming in that direction. Here's a preliminary study of the effects of Reich's Orgone accumulator on oat seed sprouting in the structure of water. So there's a lot of these experiments that people have done over the decades. This is just one convenient one here. Sprouted oat seeds. A controls B Orgone charged seeds. Just like we saw with the structured water. When you put life energy in, you get a better result in life out. And this is from waterjournal.org, which Gerald Pollack is the editor of. It's online. They do a conference every year in Bulgaria. Reich developed these cloud busters, which were basically big, long tubes connected to ground. And you can move them around the sky. So if there's no clouds, you have it into like a well. This water wouldn't work because it's not grounded, but you need grounded water. And basically, if there's no clouds, you move it around where there's none, and they'll get bigger. If you point straight at clouds, they disappear. So you can basically engineer the weather if you want. And this was done. These are some of the last experiments Reich was doing before they threw him in federal pen, because they told him to stop, cease and desist his experiments. And he wrote a brief to the court, the hoodlums in government versus the discoverer of the life energy. He said, courts have no jurisdiction in science. He said, you can't set that precedent. So they threw him in jail where he died, unfortunately. So that's the natural way. What's happening really within society? China's Three Gorges Dam, environmental catastrophe. Even the Chinese government suspects the massive dam may cause significant environmental damage. I remember before they built this, I was just horrified. I couldn't believe that the Chinese, with their millennia of knowledge of chi energy and wisdom, they would allow this to go forward. But I guess they wanted the rapid industrialization and money, and then things didn't matter. Affects regional precipitation. Has Three Gorges Dam created Chinese drought? When it comes to environmental change, the implementation of the Three Gorges Dam and reservoir is the great granddaddy of all changes. Here's a nice quote from Schauberger, which is probably back from the 1930s or 40s. Present-day science is following a wrong and dangerous path. First and foremost, it concerns the treatment of water, the principal agent of life. The existing methods of water control, power stations, and forestry are ruining water, the earth's blood. It becomes diseased and so affects all its surroundings. Instead of progress, the future promises catastrophe. And we're seeing it played out large scale. So what are we going to do about it? Well, here's what the Chinese are going to do about it. They're going to turn Tibet into a silver iodide furnace, 3 times the size of Spain, tens of cutting-edge defense technology, tens of thousands of silver iodide furnaces to stand on steep mountain ridges facing the moist monsoons from South Asia. Wind hitting the mountain produces an upward draft and sweeps the particles into the clouds to induce rain and snow. Space scientists designed the furnaces using cutting-edge military rocket engine technology to safely and efficiently burn the high-density solid fuel in an oxygen-scarce environment an altitude of over 5,000 meters. Daily operation guided by highly precise real-time data from a network of 30 small weather satellites monitoring monsoon activities over the Indian Ocean. Ground-based network will also employ other cloud seeding methods using planes, drones, and artillery to maximize the effect of the weather modification system. Now, I mean, we just saw what Reich did with simple tubes stuck in the ground. You can do it. They're basically, look, this is like insane. Because all the major rivers of Asia are fed out of China, and of course, one of the main ones is the Yangtze Kiang, which they've unfortunately screwed up with the Three Gorges Dam. So they're doing this, which is only going to make it worse. Meanwhile, this is my old friend and associate Trevor Constable, who passed away about 2 years ago, etheric weather engineer. Trevor was, a lot of people do this. Trevor was the ultimate professional. He was chief radio officer for Matson Lines. He was radio officer of the Queen Mary. They let him do these experiments on shipboard as the chief radio officer for Matson on their flagship, the SS Maui. And basically, these are geometric capacitors. Reich needed to put things into ground, and so that he was connecting up. But Trevor found he could connect directly to the ether using geometry, and developed all these different devices over the years. We've got hundreds of hours of time-lapse photography of all these on clear days. And Trevor, I mean, his official weather station, had 3 and 10 centimeter radar, so you could actually see these things. People say, well, he's just riding on the boat till he comes into a storm and then photographs it. I don't think so. We've seen it happen time and time again. I worked with these in my garden. I was using them to charge my garden, but we were getting local weather effects as well. And these are some of the other devices that they made at sea, just to show that it wasn't one particular thing. These are all sacred geometry based, but they worked with a lot of different devices, just seeing which ones worked, which ones affected the ether, which directions, trying to advance on from Wilhelm Reich's work. See, and what's interesting, some of these, I'll show you one that they, over on the right, it's a bunch of cones spinning around. They were doing an experiment with it. They were coming into Honolulu, and this one here, what they called the Spider, and they were running that actually inside the ship, behind like 12-inch thick plate steel. and they made it rain, even when it was inside the ship, because the ship was invisible to the ether when, when you're connecting it geometrically like this. So this stuff doesn't fit any modern scientific process, but it does work. These are some of the airborne experiments in Hawaii, and this is basically a tube, approximately 22 inches long, slightly varying from that, but a special ratio. So it's basically a PVC tube coated with metal. That's it. You strap it on a plane, which is made out of plastic and metal, fly for 20 minutes, and this was all recorded and reported. On the weather reports that morning, we've got this up on my YouTube channel, the whole story of this. They're going, oh, surf report, might as well go snorkeling today. Then at the end of the night, they're going, oh, flash floods. Within 20 minutes of flying, it was raining on a clear day. So these things definitely work. It heralds new science. And we used to publish this at Borderlands. And people say, well, why don't you publish this plans? I go, yeah, you don't want everybody like running around with these things. Till it's a change in consciousness to understand how they work. They're not just on-off machines. As Trevor would say, they're easy. Go study sacred geometry and learn how the ethers operate. Then it's easy. You'll make your own equipment. You don't need any plans. Here, I'm not picking on Chinese. They just happened to see this as I was doing my research. China builds world's biggest air purifier, and it seems to be working. 100-meter high air purification tower in Xi'an in Shaanxi province has helped reduce smog levels in the city. Preliminary results suggest. Smog cleansing function effectively covers an area around the tower of 10 square kilometers, right? 3.86 square miles. So basically, it's running through acres of greenhouses and filters, right? Improvements of air quality have been observed over an area of 10 square K in the city over the past few months. The tower has managed to produce more than 10 million cubic meters of clean air a day since its launch. Zhao answered that on severely polluted days, the tower was able to reduce smog close to moderate levels. Yeah, it's like, yeah, whatever. It's a lot of work for nothing. It might sound good, but here was, this was Operation Clincher. This was 1990. Trevor Constable using one of his advanced spider devices here. So these operations in the States, these were filed with National Oceanic and Atmospheric. Official federal filing made prior. No chemicals or electromagnetic radiation. Basically operated Southern California. Operational goal is to produce dramatic reduction of air pollution. Minimum goal, 15% reduction under 1989. So this whole LA basin, right? Chinese are doing this giant tower, 10 square kilometers. Trevor did the whole LA basin with 6 of these units. Well, what were the results? Let's see. 1990 smog season, cleanest air on record. So here we see the chart. We published this Journal of Borderland Research. I was the editor back in these days, May, June 91. So basically, Operation Victor, Operation Breakthrough, Operation Clincher. So those are the 3 smog operations. What it doesn't say here is there was Pincher 1 and Pincher 2, which were 2 rain operations here that were actually filed. No operations here. It started going back up. But this was the one, and it was quite interesting because, again, we have the TV footage. There was a LA reporter, some of you may, newsman, George Fishbein, and he was telling the story on the news. He's going, oh, I can't believe it. The air, he says, so clean. He says, you can breathe it. He says, you just never see air this clean in LA in July. He said, it's amazing. He says, I got to tell you a story. He said, the Air Quality Management District flew in, they spent $4 million. They flew in 20 scientists from all over the world to study smog in LA. And there wasn't any. Because at the same time, Trevor, for $4,000, ran 6 of these little devices and cleaned the smog in the entire LA basin. So the power of this technology is fantastic. And we were actually offered, we had some connections in China wanted us to do an operation up there. We put it all together and it got dropped, and we were told, they said, well, no, we don't want this technology up there. Which I thought was very interesting. I guess there's more money in building giant towers. But sort of wrap up my part, because there's going to be a couple more speakers here, just give a bit more. We'll look at the mathematics of life and water and the sun. So at the top we see Dr. Langridge. He was one of the pioneers of X-ray crystallography of DNA. So here's one of his computer renderings of axis view of DNA, and we can see these pentagonal structures in here. And then Mark Curtis, an artist, he went through, he was really trying to figure this out, how it would work, because the Crick-Watson model didn't really work geometrically. So starting to look at it like this, we're trying to think, well, how does the 6 come in? Well, it's the hydrogen bonds, and of course that's really what the whole thing is with water and all special properties of water is the hydrogen bonds. So this is our link between the 5 and the 6 here. And of course we're looking at Gerald Pollack's easy water, which is sheets of these hexagonal water molecules. You get this in carbon. This is graphite layers do that. And also the sun. Dr. Pierre-Marie Robitaille, he's developed high-resonance magnetic resonance imaging, and he started finding all these flaws in science, in Kirchhoff's law and Planck's constant. And he's come up with a proposal through a number of scientific papers that the sun's actually metallic hydrogen, the same lattice. So if this is true, and as I say, all this stuff's speculative science, but some of it's at the cutting edge in universities. So we have basically biological water, carbon life structures, and the surface of the sun are all operating on this mathematical principle. So what we're going to do now is friend Linda Zselenak going to get up and talk to you about, she's a specialist in biogeometric readings, sensitive approach to understanding, and she did experiments with Juan, our friend Juan Schlosser, who is the architect of all this place here, and he'll give a talk after, and we're going to show the relationship of these energies to biological life and the enhancement of it. Okay, cool.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Okay, I've been a student of biogeometry and Dr. Ibrahim Karim for the past 10 years. And it's a modern-day alchemy based on the subtle energy interactions of geometries. So in biogeometry, Dr. Karim has created all these tools. So these are energy quality measuring tools. So based on shaped caused waves and subtle energies that are happening in a space, we can set these dials to specific spots, and there's hemispheres, so then it interacts with the energy in the space. So we can map out energy grids, geopathic stress, electromagnetic, and beneficial qualities too. And Dr. Karim picked up where the French radiesthesists left off in like the 1930s to the 1950s. And they were doing what was vibrational radiesthesia, it was called at that time, so the study of subtle vibrations. And they figured out that it's called negative green, it's a carrier wave, and in the color spectrum, it's between black and white, and it's gray across from physical green. So that being a carrier wave, there's a vertical part and there's a horizontal part, and the vertical is detrimental and it's the electrical wave, and the horizontal is the magnetic, which we can measure beneficial frequencies. So that's the carrier wave for what he identified as the higher harmonics of gold, which is the divine energy, and the higher harmonics of ultraviolet, which is the spiritual realm. And through the measurements, he's created a dowsing, and you can call it divining also. Some people call it divining because you're connecting with the divine energies through this type of dowsing. So when these three energies are present, that's what's in power spots and the chakras in the body, ley lines. So we use these type of things like in the seeds experiments that Juan will talk about. This is how we measured the energies of the space. And it was very consistent with Dr. Korotkov's work with the GBD camera and the other device Juan was using and the seed growth. So all of it was very consistent. He'll speak to that. So it's a science of biogeometry founded by Dr. Ibrahim Karim from ancient Egypt, emerged in modern science, restoring harmony and subtle energy quality in life. Biogeometry is based on the physics of quality, underlying energy quality, information exchange affecting all living systems, narrowing the gap between energy manifestations of science and spirituality, uses energy principles of geometric shapes to balance biological energy systems with the overall framework of environmental energy interactions. Water from biogeometry bottle has a positive effect on biological energy functions as measured by the GVD camera. So Dr. Karim created this bottle, and with the proportions and the scale and the angles, everything, it changes, it structures water. So, and Masaru Emoto with biogeometry. Dr. Karim and him did some work together, I believe it was around 2004, where Dr. Karim's biogeometry cube, which is based on number and proportion and a whole bunch of things that Dr. Karim comes up with. They tested the water crystals with the effects of the biogeometry cube. So developed pictures of taking frozen water pictures, mysterious characteristics of water and influence quality of energy and the environment. Water impregnated with good energy quality forms beautiful, well-balanced hexagonal crystals. When impregnated with bad energy quality, produced badly formed and unbalanced crystals. Dr. Emoto's tech transformation energy quality into form. Dr. Karim's tech uses form to balance energy quality. Energy quality of water is a mirror of the quality of our lives. So by having this cube in the room, it affected the water. So he has these, now he has a 3-cube set that you can put in your space, and it affects the energy in the whole space. It will, it'll harmonize the effects of electromagnetic, of geopathic stress, and because we are water, it also affects human biology. So, and Dr. Karim has many different things that he uses to structure water, and so this is the effects of, these were the actual pictures from standard water to putting the cube in, the tests that he did, the studies that he did with Emoto. Yeah, so I work in interior design. So I go in and I look at the energy quality in a space. And I view a space as being alive, because it is. And then I communicate through divining or vibrational radiesthesia or vibrational dowsing, many names for it. I test with different tools, you know, what's happening in the space. And it's amazing, you know, in the middle of a big city, you can create a space that feels like you've walked into nature. So, thank you.
Okay, so this is our first slide, and as the title just says, it's regenerative architecture. So all these principles that Tom has been talking about is leading to this. You know, it's like how we can create architecture that have a regenerative effect, not just in ourselves, in our biology, but also in the surrounding environment. So when structures are designed from the realization of the intrinsic energetic aspects existing through all nature, we will naturally re-enter into a regenerative symbiotic relationship with our environment, through revealing the ultimate purpose of bioarchitecture. So this is what we can create with these principles. So I'm just going to be very brief here. I'm just going to show some of the designs I've been working with. In between them is this water restructure device, which is just at the entrance. We have it over here. So it is basically multiple cavitations that produce all these different vortices of water that are happening at once. And then as one vortex drops the water into the next one, create another 2 vortices, and then another 4 vortices and 8 vortices, and keeps multiplying. Like normally organic structures will do, will create this kind of a ramification where, this fractal iteration of division. This is a pattern that appears in nature in many places, right? So here we have the example of Leonardo da Vinci, who shows how the human heart actually contains this vortex motion as well. There are actually two counter-rotating vortices that happen at once inside of our heart. So this is, in a way, mimicking that process in order to restructure water. These are my own experiments where I basically treat water inside of a vortex, and then I use just regular water, and then put it into water a series of seeds, same number, all conditions are the same, and then just let them grow naturally, and you can see the effects of that restructure water into just simple seeds. Then more experiments where basically we use this dome, which is, we call it Trisula dome. It's actually at the villa, and in the center of the dome we germinate a series of seeds, just the same way, same conditions, same light. And then outside, actually in the bathroom, there is a little concrete box that is part of the bathroom, which very much emulates what a conventional concrete house will be. So I just planted the seeds there and then leave them for a few days. And as I was expecting, the seeds inside of the dome will germinate a lot quicker, and there's more biomass, they grow better, and they form these beautiful plants very quick. So just a little bit of theory here, which actually is going to lead us to understand the series of experiments I did with Linda, which this basically goes to explain one of the systems of measurement that we were using. So this is a typical harmonic analysis, and this is actually harmonic analysis which is done by Dan Winter, one of my teachers, who basically shows how a tree is able to act as a dielectric antenna which taps into what's called the Schumann resonances, the Schumann harmonic cascade. So when a tree is alive, it has these frequencies in it. You can measure them, right? When a tree is going to die or is sick, actually doesn't hold them. So trees and forests and almost all plant life are like dielectric antennas of the Schumann harmonic cascade. It's a resonance system that connects with the entire Earth. It's all interconnected. So this system that is basically there's two types of apps in this system. It's actually run by a device called the Muse, which is a EEG portable headset, and you use this to measure brain waves. So it's like a very sensitive magnetometer that measures EM fields, very, very weak electromagnetic fields coming from the brain. So you can use that same device not just to measure your brain waves, but to measure the subtle harmonic frequencies that emanate from living things, right? So this is what he did here, and you can see all those same frequencies that exist also in the Schumann harmonic cascade. So after being explaining that, then we can see how these fractal patterns many times have been used in sacred architecture. So there are temples throughout the whole ancient world that actually use these fractal patterns in order to tap to these subtle energies that exist within the earth. So there are technologies that actually use these fractal antennas in order to pick up a complex of different frequencies. So you can do it with technology, and that will be an electromagnetic antenna, but you can also do something very similar of what a tree actually is doing, which is a dielectric antenna, and use those structures to pick up those frequencies and produce basically fields that are very beneficial for life and for consciousness and so many other things. So here we have the work of Philip Callahan, who suggests that religious structures throughout the ancient world were fine-tuned antennae which collected energy from the sun, the earth, and the cosmos and passed it in to the meditators, the religious practitioners that used these structures, and they will also propagate through the environment around. These structures have a dielectric insulative properties and act as a DC rectifier and are able to detect and store incoming cosmic energy. The physics of dielectric systems are extremely complex. However, they can be formed into tubular, which pretty much this brings back to something that Tom Brown was talking about, some of these kind of tubular structures and rectangular. They are rectangular waveguides to collect and direct energy in the same manner as a metallic radio or a TV antenna will do, basically. And these antennas, I can't almost read that. These antennas determine the length and the radio waves in which they are able to resonate. According to Callahan, they are collectors of cosmic radio waves of an order of many meters of magnitude. So, yeah, this is more examples of this type of technology which uses form and shape in order to produce subtle energy fields. So, and they are, you have to tune them. You can tune them to cosmic energies. So here there is a very interesting example of one material that I choose to use a lot for construction, which is bamboo. And then this is a beautiful example of how biological structures create this very similar type of fractal patterns, tubular structures, which are fractal, that resonates at different scales, different levels. So nature is doing this all over the place in order to produce life. So now another beautiful example of some biological structure. That will be restructured water, right? Highly coherent, highly organized. That forms, that shapes can tap into cosmic energies and natural energies. Something like plastic, polyurethane, is highly disorganized. That will be uncoherent water, like unrestructured water, like dead water. And that cannot tap into cosmic energies, cannot tap into the earth energies or living energies. It's completely disconnected. This is connected. As simple as that. Then now I'm going to talk about a series of experiments that I did with Linda, and this is just actually a smaller version because the original paper have like 80 pages, and there were like I think 11 different locations. So I did a small selection of them, the most representatives, that basically explain. Well, it doesn't explain, actually just show what's happening. And, it's actually beautiful to do these things because you can witness them. You can experience them and you actually see what's happening. So this is the first house that we chose to carry the experiment. So we did a seed germination experiment. We used the GDB, which has an accessory called the Platonic, which is actually designed to measure space. So it's a specific device designed to measure sacred space. And then it's basically Kirlian photography, but very bold. This is Dr. Koroskov. Then we have the spectrum analysis that basically measure the subtle frequencies that exist within the environment. And then we have the seed germination experiment. So then this is the measurements that Linda did, vibrational energy measurement and the different energies that she finds when she does this dowsing. And so this first house was pretty much the one who has the less effects, the less energy. So we chose that one in order to correlate with all these other spaces. So this particular house is just a building which is designed by conventional methods. They have a lot of concrete, it has steel. It's like pretty much the regular house that most people live in. So now we're going to go one level upward. This is another house, which is, here we are in a second floor. And these are the energy levels from the GDB. Here we have a comparative where we see the first building in correlation to this one. We can see that they're very similar, they're very close. This is a sage gemination experiment, it's still pretty similar. And it maybe has a little bit more energy according to the GDB and some more harmonic inclusiveness, but still quite close to the conventional stuff. Also in the measurements that Linda did, they're pretty much equal. Then we go into the next house, which is actually Linda's house. And it's also the same type of building, but in this case, Linda was doing some energy corrections using biogeometry. We can see that there is a difference. There is a difference in the seed growth. They're a little bit bigger. The GDB is telling us that, yes, there is more energy, there is more life. There is quite a bit of difference in there. And then we have the spectrum analysis, which is saying that there is more frequencies. There is more tapping probably in the Schumann harmonic cascade. Now here we are in one of the buildings that we have here in Akasha, which is the Trishula Dome. And here is where you can actually start to see a lot of the differences. Like the seed germination experiment is quite a bit larger and it has grown more. I don't know if it's so clear in the picture. The GDB is actually like quite substantially different energy. And then the harmonic analysis also have quite a lot more harmonics. In the measurement that Linda did, then we have strong in all places in nature, low vertical green wave, some weak negative green still, good in all horizontal magnetic components, and then there is a strong BG3, which is this energy that she was talking about before. So we can see how that actually produced an effect on the seed germination experiment. And this one was probably the most significant one, which is pretty much at the top of all of them. And this structure is here at Akasha is the office, the structure we're using in the office. So you can see the seeds. Like all these pictures are taken, they are scaled. So from this point to this point, you can see the exact same scale. The pictures at scale. You can see the differences in between the growth of that seeds, how much that biomass is substantially bigger than everywhere else. You can see the root system, how it's actually, very well growth. The roots were going very deep and very far. And then the spectrum analysis also have a lot of the Schumann harmonics, and they're pretty strong, they're pretty intense. In the vibrational measurement, you have pretty much everything is great on all the planes. The BG3 at the center is quite powerful. Very low of the detrimental components of those subtle energies. Then this picture shows all of them at once, so it was not so clear. You can see, for example, the difference in weight, the difference on seed germination, same thing. This red line is right away into the measurement tape, so it's perfectly equally at scale. Same scale of the picture, of the image. You can see the difference in between this and this. It's huge. It's like, and obviously, all the times were exactly the same. We, create the same conditions, and that's what we observed, what we documented. After all this talk, we're just going to put a little video, which is basically going to show the work I've been doing for many years for NewEarth project and my own work. And basically, it's just a collection of designs and videos. And I created this video just for this presentation. And So we're just going to take it as a little meditation, a silent visual meditation, where we're just going to look. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. We're actually going to sit up here and answer questions and stuff. Anybody have any questions? Thank you, Ron.
The tubular experiment you brought up earlier, you share some more details, like how high did they fly this? Anything I'd need to know to replicate it?
Study sacred geometry and atmospheric physics, and the answer will become self-evident.
When are you starting your class?
Yeah, this stuff's actually, it's so simple that it's almost scary to tell people how simple it is. Because in the same way, ignorance of that is what's brought the Earth into the condition it's in. With cities built out of alignment, wires strung across the landscape, disrupting the energetic currents of the planet. So this is what we're really looking. I like Trevor's work, and I documented Trevor's work for quite a while. But he was a man of military bearing. He was a military historian as well. So everything was in operation, right? And his weather guns were called bazookas and stuff. And I think we need to take a different approach. I really believe that the biogeometric or bioarchitecture approach to building communities is the way to do it. Building these structures, that's the way forward, not trying to figure out how to make these little tubes and make it rain over little patches and stuff. There's a much larger picture here. That's my goal in this. But I'll still tell you later. It's actually a quite interesting story how they derived the mathematics for that tube. But any comments? Anything?
So this, for me, fits into this larger thing that's been going around about fear and abundance. And a lot of these things seem to stem from that in a way. And I'm just curious for reflection on that as well, and also maybe the power of meditation or things around that as well to affect these structures and things like water, if there's research there, and how all of this kind of weaves together.
You got anything to say on that?
You're saying the power of intention?
Potentially,
meditation?
yeah. It seems like, life in general stems from intention, and then the way we sort of, where that intention comes from, whether it's fear-based or, trust, abundance-based.
In biogeometry, we measured the effects of blessing a room or blessing your water or food. We would measure the energies before and after. And it was a significant difference in a space, or it would actually structure water. Like you couldn't leave the water sit there for 3 weeks and it hold that same energy. But in that moment, the intention from your heart or saying a blessing, we did experiments where if you step into a room, especially with your right foot first, and say a blessing for the room, it'll change the whole energy quality in the space.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of experiments on intention in water. Dr. Emoto's are sort of well known. There's also experiments. I used to have a book, I probably still have it in storage somewhere. Charles Littlefield's Man, Minerals, and Masters was published by DeVores back in the 1930s, and he was doing meditations on crystals as he was forming crystals. He'd meditate on a Bible passage and, get little sort of images like that. So those sorts of approaches go back quite a bit. But even there's a number of articles and videos on intention in water, people doing sprouting or, growing rice, different things. It certainly has an effect. Certainly has effect on plants. Everything does in a sense, because plants are sensitive. They're aware. They don't think like us, right? We've got internal processes because we've got, we're animals. We have ensouled processes. The plants don't. Their soul is the heavens. In fact, their whole morphological processes are based on planetary motions and relationships, where all those processes have been ensouled in our organs within us, but yet we have the relationship to them. So we have the same microbiome, so there's still that same overarching interaction once we get past our ego. So. Got anything to say?
I can comment to that. Just to quote unquote John Kelly, he says something like, when you get in the realm of the ether, mind can interact with that realm a lot easier that can do with more dense physical matter. So this is how you could say that emotions of mind could affect the weather, or particularly could affect water, because water is kind of this state in between manifestation and non-manifest. So I think that's one of the reasons why water is like ether. In a sense, has some of the properties of ether. This is why it has these very unusual, these rare qualities. So then, in that sense, water can be highly influenced by mind, as weather can.
And there's other things that affect as well, too. And, like Don Paris, who was so kind to introduce me. Thank you, Don. I was honored. Because Don's done fantastic research for decades on basically scalar energies, computerized radionics, showing the effects of subtle energy on living systems, the beneficial effects that occur through it. So there's certainly... Would you like to say anything to that, Don? You shine some of your brilliance on us, please? No. There'll be a microphone over here. Yeah, if you've never seen one of Don's lectures, they're brilliant too. Because it's Trevor Constable, right? His motto, only results count. Only results count. So, yeah, that's what we want to see. Is what's the effect on living systems?
Well, I'll talk a little bit about that. Then I want to present a couple questions as well.
Sure.
Which kind of ties in with that. But basically what my approach has been is, what do the subtle energies and spiritual energies, how do they interact at the physical level? Physical and emotional and mental level, but how do we get actual effects here in the realm that we happen to be finding ourselves existing in? So the experimentation that I've worked on for the last 30 years has been practical, down to earth, and it sounds like it's way out in the cosmos, but when you get it down to the fundamentals of what can we do, and that leads into my question, which I wanted to present to Linda, is what can we do as non-scientists or non-bioengineers or non-sacred geometrists when we don't have these capacities of like Juan, who, I mean, these are phenomenal gifts. And I'm just astounded by his work. And one of the things that I wanted to say when I introduced Tom, which I been thinking, I should have said this. Back in the time when we used to hang out when we were younger men, we were the young guys, and all the old guys were absolute geniuses. And a lot of the people, these scientists, you don't know who they are, but Dr. Bob Beck or some of these people were just amazing scientists. Bob had 180 IQ, and when we would sit with him, our brains would kind of like just go on still mode. Like couldn't really think because his brain waves were so strong. But like somebody that you probably don't know his name, but I would say 99.9% of the people in here are using his inventions and his technology, is Marcel Vogel. How many people have heard of Marcel Vogel? A couple hands. Okay. How many people have a cell phone here with a display on it? He developed the liquid crystal display. He discovered color phosphorus that made the color television screen. He invented the hard disk. I could go on and on. This guy was just amazing. And he was one of the speakers at these weird conferences, psychotronics, and we got to hang out with these people. So what I wanted to say about Tom, bringing it back to that, now that we're grown up, those guys are all gone and in heaven helping us. But Tom is probably the smartest person that I know on the planet. And I've met some super, super genius people. So I know he's super humble about it. I mean, he doesn't walk around going, it's really great to spend time with him.
No, thank you.
Talk.
I just know how much there is to learn. God, I'm just scratching the surface. I'm hoping y'all jump in and help figure this stuff out. Yeah.
So my question to Linda would be, what can people do in their own homes, simple ideas or something that we can grasp without having to go to a professional, a designer or a professional that actually designs rooms? What can we do to change the harmonics that's simple, that everybody can do? Like, what are just like 3 things that they could do to bring up the energy from, I saw some of those readings, they were like, you know, at the basement level. Mm-hmm. Well, for one, get out of the basement, but what can normal people do in their home just to change some vibration and get a little bit higher? That's my first question.
Well, first, become aware of the fact that your space is energy and it's alive and there's a consciousness there. A lot of people don't look at their space as being alive, therefore they don't have that interaction with it. So once you realize that the way I see it is it's a living, breathing entity. And so when you go in and you honor it in that way, that right there is going to start to shift the energy in the space. The next thing is if you have a lot of clutter. You know, clutter kind of traps energy, and I don't feel it's honoring the space when you just have things, you know, that are all chaotic. And just start to be aware of how you feel in the space. If you get still and notice, because, you know, most of our lives are hectic and we just go, and we're not really paying attention. If you start to get still in your space, you'll start to feel into, you know, what's feeling a little bit off. And start to clear up the clutter and start to honor your space and communicate with it in a way that, you know, from your heart, you know, show a space that, yeah, there's love there and that you care about it. You know, some people think that sounds maybe a little bit crazy, but if everything's energy, then everything is consciousness. And, you know, so that's a couple ways that you don't have to call in a professional. And if you start to pay attention, you'll become more aware. And you'll start to notice things, and you'll be able to start to shift, even shifting the position of something. Just experiment with that. Like, say you have a table in a certain position. Try shifting it into, say, a 45-degree angle, you know, and how does that feel now? So just honor your space, you know, as somewhere that it, you know, that's your sacred space. So just start to treat it that way and view it as that way. Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
I caught that too when you said that, because whenever we walk in the house, I greet our house.
Yeah.
Verbally. Hello, house. How are you doing?
Yeah.
And now I kind of like got a confirmation of that. That was really great.
Well, just an example. I have a rental property back in Canada, and I bought that house new. I lived there for a while. I always treated it as though it was, I always honored the space, and between tenants I would go in and do all kinds of energetic things to it and just spend time with it. And right now I'm being faced with, I have these people living there that are just busting at the seams with clutter, and I'm thinking of selling it. And I was just like, it doesn't feel right. It just doesn't feel right, me calling the agent from here and saying, you know, put it on the market with those people in. It was almost like the space was trying to communicate with me. So I was talking to this intuitive Balinese woman, and I said, I'm thinking of selling my house. And she's like, that would be good. And then she just kind of shook her head and she said, I've never had this happen to me before. And I was like, what? She said, your space just came to me as though it was alive and wanted to communicate. Wow. Yeah, and I just, at that moment, I was like, I need to go home. I need to go back to Canada, which I'm going to do next month, and honor this space and move back in and fix it up. And, you know, I started that with this house, and I feel if I want to let it go, I have to complete, you know, and go back. But I was fascinated when she said that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I have one more with Juan. Yes. Juan and I have been working together for the last 5 years, I guess, by now, creating sacred geometric, we call it jewelry, but it's much more than jewelry. It's not really, I mean, some people actually really love it as a jewelry piece, but it goes a lot deeper than that. Like this little one was created on the phi ratio. Maybe you can just talk a little bit about that, of what your idea of why you created it in this particular shape and what the shape does by itself, excluding the frequencies, which I'll mention.
Yes, so this is one of the devices that we created together, also with Mark Lee, which is with us tonight. And so inside of it is this frequency generator who has a scalar wave coil. So it's a coil that puts out scalar energy. You basically collapse the electromagnetic field in order to create a field which is, I could say, is beyond time and space. Is what, for example, where you were seeing these pictures of the heart, like you have contra-rotating fields of blood going inside your heart. So this is a little bit how many biological structures produce these energies in order to produce life. So in a way, what the CHIO is doing is mimicking those energetics. So just briefly have to describe that, like what that particular design is doing is almost like you could see it like a little temple, and the proportions, the shapes are all contained in this proportion, the golden mean. So in a way, it's a cavity, it's a resonator that resonates and amplifies that energy that is produced by the chip. And in order to resonate, it's like an instrument, like, so you refine the shape and the form of it, and then you can create different qualities of sound. So there will be the analog of that. It will be a guitar where the resonator is designed specifically in order to create an amplification and a harmonization of the frequencies that which are in there already. So that's this piece in particular, Geophi.
I love that, portable temples. That is a good way to think of it.
And on top of that, when he said that struck the chord. This was, I don't know who came up with this idea, if it was Juan or Mark or Made, but they incorporated the concept of the Panche Dhatu, which are the 5 sacred metals in Bali and India from the Hindu religion. And so they're made with the 5 sacred metals, which they actually put the 5 metals down on the ground, and the Balinese priest, in this case, does a mantra ceremony. The mantras go way, way back to create the energy vortex, to imbue these metals. They sing the mantras to these metals and create the energy vortex, and then they build the temple on top of those 5 metals. It's called Panche Dhatu. And so one of them came up with the idea, let's make the Chios with Panche Dhatu and have the Balinese priest bless them with the Panche Dhatu ceremony before they go out. So these are like little temples, realistically.
Yeah. Let's say it was Bali who actually created that. We all came up together. Bali.
Bali created that. Oh, that's great.
To speak to that, actually, which there is a correlation there. Like, so a power spot is actually where 2 ley lines cross, and when they cross, you produce a vortex. So as those 2 fields, magnetic lines, cross with each other at certain angles, then they produce this vortex. So the Balinese are so tuned on that they can feel these places, and this is the places where they choose to put their temples, and the temples are, in a sense, fulfilling that function. They are resonators that harmonize that energy and then spread it into the environment, and then they utilize that as as a way to connect to higher forces. So yeah, it's very, very correlated.
And that's the same principle we're doing with the scalar. We actually have a scalar frequency generator inside, which collapses the electromagnetic field, which creates basically a gravitational field, is another way of looking at it. And then the harmonic shape of the Cheophi or the Sri Yantra, or even in the bracelet, the new one, then that spreads those informational fields out. And it goes much deeper than that, but generally, and then now we have a room balancer and different things that does like a whole area.
Well, you can think of it like when it goes into the scalar field, it's ambient but not there. Like I was talking about the ethers, like the tops of plants, they're rooted in the ethers, right? But the ethers are mobile, and that's why they can blow in the wind and stuff. But when the right conditions are there, it comes out. Same with these. when you're broadcasting a scalar field to something, it appears where you need it. Because it's ambient everywhere in space, but only when the conditions are right does it appear. So.
And those are the nodal points. And so, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I'm done with my questions. Somebody else have a question? I'll turn it back here.
Yeah, and also, too, with the harmonic energies, we're looking at Trevor's weather engineering using. At the same time he was doing that, we were also working with, which I originally got the idea from Bob Beck from his old writings on it, although we did a lot of research beyond that, was the old multi-wave oscillators, harmonic antennas, which were powered by Tesla coils. And what we found is by making basically logarithmic fractal based on golden ratio, that they in themselves would affect life, like growing sprouts. I used to have pictures, old analog pictures. They've gone by wayside. We need to reproduce those. And with milk, I did find some of those. We basically have these little 3-inch antenna with just a dozen rings harmonically on it. 2 glasses of milk. You sit them in the window. One's sitting on antenna, one's not. Open milk on the window for 3 days. What's it going to do? Well, the one with no antenna would just get all moldy and cruddy and stuff, and the other one would just perfectly go into curds and whey. And they were probably about 12 inches away from each other. And we'd see the effects on sprouts. And, we used to get, because Trevor was doing a lot of weather engineering with tubes, so we had a lot of the tubes that we're using in the garden to trickle water through. We had a biodynamic garden in Northern California. And following Phil Callahan's work with the stone towers, so I took one of these resonant tubes and we filled it about 1/3 with river gravel from the river, was just below the house, and then I put one of the 12-inch harmonic antennas on top, and our asparagus was growing around it. It was all growing up, pointing towards the antenna from different angles. This stuff actually attracts life, it attracts the life energy. So when you're working with these mathematics, so there's more to it than just numbers. Like I said at the very beginning, with the quadrivium, the numbers, not just in the simple form, but in the qualitative nature, is you're dealing with numbers in that sense when you get into sacred geometry.
Okay, so what would you say is the substratum that generates manifestation? What's the substratum, or even that which gives pattern?
That's a wonderful question. People have been arguing over that. As Trevor Constable said, he said, people have been arguing over that for thousands of years. He said, I just get to engineering it with geometry. But yeah, under many different names, it's really a good question. When we think of as chaos these days as a mess, like, there's chaos in the streets, people are going crazy. But to the ancients, chaos meant this divine state from which all possibilities existed and could come forth. It was a very high state. We think of it perhaps now as ether, not the simple sort of hydromechanical ether that Michelson Morley and Oliver Lodge and all them were searching for, although they're obviously getting certain results, but more of a higher sort of ether, which in itself is a form of intelligence, non-discursive like our waking consciousness, but more of a cosmic intuitiveness that knows when we're drawing on it properly and can produce changes or effects within reality, or contrary effects if we're not operating properly, which is what gives us our lessons, I think.
So how is that then creating order? Because what we're looking at, the pictures you gave us, were all structures of patterns, geometrics that shaped. And if we apply ourselves to create greater order, we can create phenomenal effects on matter, correct?
Correct. I'll let these guys talk about it. First I want to say, well, when I was working with Eric Dollard, the Tesla genius years ago, he used to say, well, and this was really good, you go, space, that's in 3D. There's only one dimension of space, right? And 3D is a coordinate system. And I found in Rudolf Steiner's work, right, he talked about how he said that one of the gravest errors of mankind's descent into matter, and what he called the fourth post-Atlantean epoch, starting around time of Galileo, was removal of the 3D proprioceptive, spiritual nature of our being and our experience of space and taking it outside and assuming that it's a metric of space itself. Space isn't 3D. Our experience of space is 3D. Space itself doesn't function that way. Space functions, in a sense, as Eric pointed out, like when we were actually creating the non-electromagnetic Tesla currents, they look like life. You look at regular electric sparks, they look sort of like plants and stuff, but they're still sort of jagged. The more harmonic you make the electricity, like the Tesla magnifying transmitter we had out the Integratron out in California desert back in the 80s, when it was below coil resonance, the discharges, we call them discharges for lack of a better word, because you see a big spark come off the top of the coil, and we're reading 5 radio frequency amps going into ground. So obviously it was an implosive thing, like I was talking about lightning being a collapse of the dielectric lines of force. But when it was below coil resonance, because we could tune in pulse rate bandwidth, it looked like the tops of plants, like different trees, or basically the archetypal structures. Not with the leaves, but basically the stem structures. When it was above coil resonance, it made dendritic structures like roots. When it was at coil resonance, you got a critically damped spark. The spark was trying to jump back on itself because it was like almost monopolar electricity. If we could have probably tuned the equipment properly, that's what Tesla was going for, because that's basically a fern. It looks like a fern tree or something. So space itself, the point I was getting to on that is that space itself, when you discharge energy into it, it has these functions of space inherent in it. The metric of space isn't a 3D coordinate system that we've imposed through consciousness, but rather, as I showed, the Platonic solids, the way that plants grow out of it. It's the nature of space itself to discharge in sacred geometric patterns. That's the underlying nature of it. What causes that, I don't know. But I can see that is what is happening. So, anyway, do you have anything? Sure, please.
Thank you. Generally in the atomic structure, we see that the patterns are hexagonal and pentagonal. And I just wondered whether you, I've never really found a kind of correlative reason for that. Do you?
I've come across work that actually refers that. There was a Dr. Moon, I think he was up at Northwestern University in Illinois. Very little on. I started reading some of his papers, but I didn't quite understand exactly where he's getting at, only because I didn't spend the time on it. But he was basically proposing that it was something, he was working things out mathematically with electron orbits and relationships and showing that these patterns actually exist within the atomic structure itself. Now, I looked at a lot of different atomic structures. I was just listening to a lecture the other day. Somebody gave it at Electric Universe conference in the States last year on a model of the atom that doesn't include neutrons. He's saying that there's only positive and negative charges, which we interpret as electrons, and protons, but that the neutrons would actually be a different way that the electrons are interacting with the protons. There's a lot of interesting thoughts, and then there's this Kelvin Abraham. He's got tetraionics, which is a whole different way of working out quark structures. There's a lot of, outside the mainstream, there's a lot of people trying to figure out how those processes might work and what the real structures are.
Yeah, because I perceive that with the atom, I mean, I've got a very rudimentary understanding of it, that you have electrons, neutrons, and protons, and you have a subsection which is like up and down, and the quarks, therefore and so that in itself then creates a tetrahedron going up and a tetrahedron going down, which would then give us a double tetrahedron or a hexagon in a 2D format, which would then tick the hexagon side of things.
Well, that's tetraionics, which I'm actually hoping, one of the things we're hoping to do here is start actually getting live streaming and interviewing people. One of the people I want to interview is Kelvin Abraham, who's actually doing that tetraionics with tetri, right? And he's got all the diagrams. You search for it, it's not hard to find. He's got Facebook pages, and he's been pushing that for a while, videos. But he's approaching it from that structure. This Dr. Moon, he was probably a bit more mainstream. if you search for Dr. Moon, sacred geometry, nuclear physics or something, you'll find a guy. We're not set up here. We should be set up. We could pull it up on screen while we're talking about it. We'll have to.
Hello.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you, given that you've acquired so much understanding and knowledge about how these structures can affect our lives in what appears to be beneficial ways, like with the water and the shapes of the buildings we're in, what is it that you do specifically yourself using this knowledge to enhance your life and to live a healthier, happier, longer life?
That's a good question. I'm going to let these guys answer it. I've done a lot over the years, but recently I've sort of uprooted, moved around a lot. My approach hasn't been so much to apply it on this plane. I wanted to, but just the way life has gone, I haven't spent that much time in that other than developing devices and trying to understand. It's not really main approach of my main work. It's just something I had to give a talk, so I had to dig up something that sounded real interesting for you guys.
Do you charge your water or anything?
Oh, no,
like
I charge
that?
water. No, I've got constantly little devices going. I've got harmonic antennas around. I'm wearing one of these. I've got little devices all over the place. I meditate a lot. But I'm interested in not so much the physical structure, like we have mandalas and yantras. These are like yantras, right? Yantras are instruments. They're form, shape. Mandalas can be that, but certain ones like Vajrayana mandala, Dhyani Buddhas, that's like a metaphysical bullet point system. So I'm really more interested in correlating reality to that as like first sector of the mandala, Akshobhya, the mirror-like wisdom, the connection between subjective and objective. What is that? How does that work? If I look at appearances around me, I've spent most of my life not so much trying to apply this technology, but trying to find out what was really happening in life, the flaws in science, which are manifold, going through all the different fields, starting with Newton saying that 7 colors come out of light, which if anybody's actually spent time with a prism. In fact, I'll give a lecture on that. That'll be one of the upcoming ones. We'll do one on light and color, show how prisms really work. And Newton's errors, because that actually ties in then to the structure of the mandala, atmospheric color formation, electrical wave propagation. In order for technology to move forward, it's not that we can just figure out a few devices and insert them into the process. We need to completely change the approach. The whole philosophical paradigm requires a change, like in cymatics. You have a plate going with a frequency on it. It gives you one pattern. You change the tune. There's no gradual change. It goes into chaos, and then a new form appears. So I've been seeking that new form, seeing what's there. And in the process, love to live in beautiful places. So anyway, I'm just rambling at this point. You have anything to say? Did that help answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Because ultimately, this and that, we're all here trying to figure out what's going on. But I charge water with antennas. I got harmonic antennas around, so I try to basically apply it to everything. But also, too, one thing that I haven't been able to, because I've moved around a lot, is certain color machines. One of the ones I really liked was one called the Spectrochrome from Dinshaw Gadiali. That was what we call a non-Newtonian sort of approach to color. 5 slides make 12 colors. So you have basically a hexagram. like I was talking about the prism. What comes out of a prism, right? Because you always see these pictures, dark side of the moon, right? They were musicians, not scientists, so we can't blame them. But if you go to science books, the pictures that they have in the science books are wrong. They show white light going into a prism, and they show 7 colors coming out of them. I've done 30 years of experiments with prisms, and I've never been able to get 7 colors out of a prism. Only 4 colors come out of a prism. You got red, yellow, and blue, violet. You bring them together in a slit, you got green. You pull a slit apart, green disappears. Green, no green. It's real simple. But according to Helmholtz, the light rays fall upon one another in such a fashion as to cancel each other out. I'm going, yeah, it happens too quick. I'm not buying that one. Because if you reverse, so the color appears on the border. The yellow's in the white, the red's in the black. The blue's in the white, the violet's in the black side. Green, no green. And that is the dominant one, which is why Newton made his error. But, Newton was an alchemist. There's not 7 actual colors in there. If you go try to define them scientifically, he was an alchemist. That was his alchemical philosophy. He overlaid upon that. That's where the 7 colors came from. But if you reverse that, and that's what Goethe, the great German poet-scientist, showed. He took one look through a prism. He couldn't believe people were falling for it. So he spent like the rest of his life following on from his plant metamorphoses studies on his Farben layer, color theory. And he shows, so if you reverse it, rather than having run light through a slit and getting green, you reverse it, run light around an object, so you're reversing the slits, and it goes yellow, red, and then you got blue, violet. You bring them together, you get magenta in the middle. Pull them apart, no magenta, magenta, no magenta. But you're like, oh, magenta is a compound color. It's just when you put red and violet from the end of the spectrum. But you can do it with a prism. I want to do a talk here. I'm just trying to figure out how we can project those up and really show, or at least have prisms that we can pass around and you can see. And once you experience it, my friend Trevor Constable, the weather engineer, he turned me on to that back about 1985, and I couldn't believe it. It just really changed my consciousness on things. But fundamentally, those are the sectors of the mandala, right? It all fits. The 4 colors, the 4 manifestations, the quaternity of existence. You find these patterns unfolding through everything. So, and that's one of the things that we haven't really delved into too much is the colored windows and types of things we can put into these structures. And another approach that I've wanted to bring into this, and we have discussed, but we haven't really worked it into the diagrams yet, is the cosmological connections, solstices, equinoxes. If you look at, anybody here familiar with like Chaco Canyon out in the American desert? That giant, like dozen major houses, the old Pueblo stuff. 10 million cut sandstone blocks in each house, 100 million cut sandstone blocks in the valley. Giant 4-story things, nobody lived in them. They just built these giant things, so they had long walls, and the walls are basically delineating the 18.6-year lunar cycle, the greater and lesser standstills. This thing, just to even survey that in the desert where there's no water and build this thing, which would have taken them a couple hundred years because it involves, what were they doing building an 18.6-year lunar calendar 1,000 years ago in the desert, at the same time that the Gothic cathedrals are being built, like in France. The Gothic cathedrals of northern France, all the Notre Dame cathedrals, are laid out on the landscape of France in the pattern of the constellation Virgo. It's like, and they were actually ancient sites that they were built on. So there's something about connecting with the cosmos in all this too. So that's something I'm really hoping as we look into further community building, and that we sort of start incorporating that level of technology, because all the ancients did it and all the moderns do it. You look at Washington, D.C. and London and all these places all have this stuff built in. They just don't tell anybody. So there's a reason for it. So that's something we can look at putting in. So I'm rambling again. Any more questions? Yeah. Comments? Hey, Robert, I was wondering if you wanted to say a couple things about your experiments with water. Would you be mind? I don't mind. Yeah, cool. Robert Pascoe and I showed his crystal blue device, and what impressed me about that is that you get results.
Yeah, well, basically, what we were doing is what you were talking about. We were going through the practical rather than going at the scientific side of it. We took it out into the field. So we wanted to see what structured water would do. We devised a way using rare earth minerals to create the structured water, and then took it out to the field in India, in America. I've got farms in China now, Malaysia, and consistently we get the same results throughout worldwide. So what we found basically is that this is a reality, and then you start to take it into the realms that you're talking about, and the theologies you're talking about, and the intentions that you're talking about, and all of these effects that create these things are a reality. And my awakening to the whole thing was the reason behind it is that everything is water. There's water in everything. There's plants. So, you're 70%, your body's 70%, your brain's 90%, your blood's 90%. So all of that comes into the existence that we have here with each other, with the Earth itself, with the universe, the galaxy. It all folds together, and the tie between it, to me anyway, is water. That's how it works. It's the transmission device. It's the computer. Let's say it can be programmed. It takes it from one thing to another. So that's basically what we look at, and the other side of that too is we want to get it to people. That's the other thing. That's how do you it's all great to know this knowledge. This knowledge is wonderful. It's been around for thousands of years. The Buddhists prayer water. They have prayers, confessional water confessions. Christians the same. Holy water. Everybody's had it. Everybody's done it. They just have hidden it from us. But people are becoming much more aware of it now. So how do you help with that? How do you help get it to everybody? How do you help spread it to humanity so it does some good? And those are some of the key questions that I'd like answered, or I'd like help with, because that's what we work on every day. We try and figure this out. People out there need it. We know the answers. The knowledge is there. You, as Don said, you're one of the most brilliant people on this planet. You know the answers. So the next step is how do we take it out and make it benefit, make that change.
Right, because you're also doing this with like fish farms.
Oh yeah.
It's not just agriculture.
Yeah. We've done it in every realm you can. I mean, we've got chicken farms out there that chicken coops that don't smell. I think that's phenomenal. I mean, the water.
That's a big one.
It is. It's a huge one. They don't molt. The chickens are happy. They run around with little smiles on their beaks. There's a whole in everything. The fish farms that we've got, we're finding right now that using structured water in combination with a few other things, and timing and computerizing and keeping all of the temperatures correct, the pH correct, all of that, we can increase the growth of a fish by 50% in 7 days.
Wow.
So if you're trying to feed people and they happen to be meat eaters or fish eaters, then there's an answer.
Have you noticed on any of the larger scale projects any comments as far as effects of changes on climate?
Yes, we have, as a matter of fact. We've had visits from funny men in the United States who ask us what we're doing, and we sort of go, I don't know.
Right. Well, one of the slides I had, it was something actually Juan brought up. I had about a dozen slides I didn't put in because you never know where these talks are going to go, and try to keep them somewhat short. But I don't know if you remember, there was this mystery Sri yantra that appeared up in the dry lake bed in Oregon back, 20-something years ago. And I remembered it, but Juan brought it up, and I didn't actually know. So we went and looked it up, and I found a bit on it. And somebody did it. It was like 12 miles of furrows making this thing. It was a beautiful job, all geometrically perfect. But apparently it created a microclimate in the area, and it also change the soil bacteria to more beneficial, which is similar to the effects of the Agnihotra, which Robert and Lux did at the beginning of this evening, which does have a profound effect on soil microbes and air cleaning in the area. So this geometric pattern just in the ground actually had that effect.
Yeah.
So,
And it's, we get the same results. Basically, that's, you get cleansing of the earth, cleansing of the soil, and weather pattern changes. And the one I just mentioned was in Colorado, actually, because all we did was went out and did a large scale watering of an area, and the weather pattern changed. And that caused a lot of questions.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Good info. Thank you on that. Yeah. Actually, I had a question for you, Linda. I've always been curious about this sort of the negative green within pyramids. I first came across that in Christopher Hill's work back in the 70s, supersonics and stuff, and talking about the negative green. And I didn't realize it till I started looking into biogeometry that there's two types.
Yeah.
Could you just explain that a bit more? Because I've just been trying to really understand it a bit. Because we talked about that earlier, and Juan was actually showing, and carrying on from you, the horizontal and vertical effects.
Well, the ancient cultures knew of these energies, and this is why the pyramids, the three main pyramids at Giza, have a 0.5 degree indent down the center of each side, because it changes the negative green effect coming from the center. So when we would measure the pyramids without that indent, like we would create them in class, there was the vertical negative green, which is the electric wave, and it's a carrier wave. And then when you, with the 0.5 degree indent at the pyramids, like at the pyramids of Giza, it changes it, it brings in the horizontal negative green, which is the carrier wave for the higher harmonics of gold and the higher harmonics of ultraviolet, which is the spiritual, like divine energy. So the French radiesthesists were the first one back in the 1930s to 1950s to identify these two waves, and one being vertical, one being horizontal. And then Dr. Karim from Egypt continued this work. So the vertical, the electrical component of negative green is what's in electromagnetic and your cell phone and geopathic stress. So this is, he says it's the in the color spectrum of the visible and invisible colors, it's opposite of the physical green and between black and white. So they identified it in the gray area. So they took it much deeper than what I have an understanding of. But now with the pendulums that was shown on the slide, we could measure if that electrical vertical wave of negative green exists. And then do things to use geometries and shapes and proportion and color and scale and everything to, it's an alchemical process to change the quality of that vertical component to the horizontal. So it's a qualitative science. So it's using the geometries. And so like with my cell phone, I have a correction on it, and without the correction, on the pendulum set to the vertical negative green, I pick up tons of it. As soon as I put the correction with the geometries on it, it stops. It just, I'm not picking up that energy anymore. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question.
No, it does. It's just fascinating, that whole sort of qualitative realm of...
Yeah. But it is a carrier wave of either detrimental or beneficial.
You can see the effects of the geometries on living things, so it's not like you're just feeling it and thinking it's there.
We're actually
it's affecting
measuring
living forms in the process. You've just been sort of trained or studied how to be sensitive to that and use the tools.
Yeah, and how to measure it. So I don't have the same in-depth understanding like the French radiesthesists or Dr. Karim or the ancient cultures. I've learned how to measure and work with those frequencies.
No, it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Any other comments? You guys got anything else to say? Because I'm sort of talked out. But any other comments from the gallery? No, I think we'll thank you very much for hanging out.
And